Life teaches us lessons in the most unexpected ways. Some come as whispers in the night, others as storms that shake our very souls. This story is about love, betrayal, and redemption, told through the eyes of an old man who once believed he had seen everything. But that night, when his little granddaughter whispered a few trembling words, his world changed forever. "Grandpa," she said softly, "tonight my parents are going to take away your fortune." What could make a child say something like that? What kind of fear hides behind such innocent eyes? Tonight, you will journey through a family torn between greed and love, a grandfather who faces the truth buried deep within his own home, and a legacy that no amount of money could ever buy. So, close your eyes, relax, and let me tell you a story, one that may remind you how precious trust really is, and how even in the darkest moments, love can light the way home. The rain had been falling since afternoon, a soft, steady drizzle that painted silver lines across my window. I was sitting in my favorite armchair by the fire, an old wool blanket draped over my knees, listening to the quiet crackle of the logs. At my age, silence had become my closest companion. It was in the silence that memories whispered the loudest. It was almost 8 o'clock when I heard the faint sound of footsteps, tiny, hesitant ones. I didn't have to look up to know who it was. Only one person in this house walked as though she was afraid to wake the floor itself. "Come in, sweetheart," I said, my voice a mix of amusement and affection. The door creaked open, and there she was, little Emma, my granddaughter, with her messy curls and her favorite pink nightgown that she refused to replace, even though it was getting too small for her. She was clutching her stuffed rabbit, the one I'd given her on her 5th birthday. Her eyes, big, bright, and full of something that wasn't quite fear, but close, flickered toward the hallway before she tiptoed closer to me. "Grandpa," she whispered, her voice trembling, "can I talk to you?" I smiled and gestured for her to come closer. "Of course, my dear. What's troubling you?" She climbed onto the stool beside my chair, swinging her feet nervously. For a moment, she didn't speak. She just stared into the fire as if searching for courage among the flames. Finally, she leaned in, her little hand clutching my sleeve. "Grandpa," she said, almost in a breath, "tonight my parents are going to take away your fortune." I froze. The words hit me like a gust of cold air from an open window. I stared at her, certain I'd misheard. "What did you say, Emma?" She looked at me with those innocent eyes that never lied. "I heard Mommy and Daddy talking. They were in their room. I was playing with my dolls outside the door, and they didn't know I was listening." She swallowed hard, her small voice trembling. "Mommy said you keep forgetting things, and Daddy said it's time to make you sign papers before it's too late." My hand tightened on the armrest. A strange, heavy silence filled the room, heavier than the rain outside, heavier than my old heart could bear. I forced a gentle smile. "You must have misunderstood, sweetheart. Sometimes grown-ups talk about boring things that sound strange." But Emma shook her head vigorously. "No, Grandpa. I heard them say it clearly. Daddy said you wouldn't even notice. He said he'll make you sign something, and then everything will belong to him." Her voice broke on the last word, and tears welled in her eyes. I reached out and pulled her onto my lap, hugging her close. Her tiny heart was beating fast against my chest. "Sure, it's all right, my dear. Thank you for telling me. You did the right thing." She sniffled. "Are you mad at Daddy?" I hesitated. What could I tell her? That her father, my own son, Might be plotting to rob me of everything I'd spent a lifetime building? That greed could turn even love into something poisonous? No. She was too young for such burdens. Of course not, I said softly. Sometimes people make bad choices when they're scared or desperate. It doesn't mean they're bad forever. Emma looked up at me with watery eyes. But I don't want them to hurt you, Grandpa. I kissed her forehead. They won't, sweetheart. I promise you that. She rested her head on my chest and whispered, "Please don't tell them I told you. Mommy said never to eavesdrop." I chuckled softly, even as my heart ached. Your secret is safe with me. We sat like that for a long time, the old man and the little girl, both keeping secrets that were too heavy for our hearts. The fire crackled softly, painting flickering gold patterns on the walls, and outside, the rain turned into a steady rhythm that lulled her to sleep in my arms. When I was sure she was asleep, I carried her to her room and tucked her in. She murmured something in her sleep, something about a rabbit and a magic garden, and I smiled despite the storm brewing inside me. I kissed her forehead and whispered, "Sleep well, my brave girl." Then I returned to my chair and stared at the dying fire. The night felt different now, darker, quieter, almost alive. I could hear every sound in the house, the ticking clock, the dripping faucet, the creak of the old staircase. Each sound seemed to whisper one question in my ear: what if she's right? I had noticed things lately, things I had brushed aside as coincidences. My son, Michael, coming over more often than usual. His wife, Susan, being unusually polite, bringing me tea and smiling too sweetly. And those papers they'd asked me to look over last week, with complicated legal words I hadn't bothered to read. I told myself they were just being responsible, that they were worried about me, about the company, about what would happen when I was gone. But tonight, Emma's whisper had cracked that illusion. I poured myself a glass of whiskey, just one, and sat back, letting the warmth burn through the chill creeping up my spine. My mind wandered back through the years, to the days when Michael was a little boy, curious, kind, full of dreams. His mother and I had done everything we could for him. Private school, college, a position in the business. I'd hoped he'd grow up to value hard work, honesty, compassion. But somewhere along the way, ambition turned into hunger. And hunger, when fed too well, becomes greed. I sighed and looked around my study. The shelves were lined with decades of memories, photographs, trophies, old books, even the small wooden box where I kept my will. Everything I'd ever worked for was right here. And now, it seemed, my own son wanted to take it all. I thought of confronting him, of demanding an explanation, shouting, accusing, but then I remembered Emma's frightened face. No, that wouldn't help. I needed to be smarter than that. If they thought I was old and forgetful, maybe that could work in my favor. Let them think I don't see, I muttered to myself. Let them think I'm weak. I took out my notepad and began to write down everything Emma had said, every word, every detail. My hand trembled slightly, but my mind was sharp as ever. I made a plan, quietly, methodically. Decades in business had taught me one thing: never show your cards until it's time. The clock struck midnight. I turned off the lamp and looked out the window. The rain had stopped. The moon peeked through the clouds, silver and watchful. "Tonight, my boy," I whispered to the darkness, "you may think you're taking my fortune, but you have no idea what I'm capable of." The next morning, the house was bright again, deceptive in its warmth. Susan greeted me with her usual cheer. "Good morning, Dad. How did you sleep?" "Like a baby," I lied with a smile. Michael joined us at the table, his tie perfectly straight, his smile even tighter. "Dad, we were thinking, maybe after breakfast you could go over some financial papers with me." "Just routine stuff." "Of course," I said. "You know me, always happy to sign away my life." He laughed nervously, thinking it was a joke. I laughed too, though for different reasons. Emma sat at the table, quiet and thoughtful, her eyes darting between us. When Michael turned to pour himself coffee, she met my gaze. I winked, just barely, and saw the tiniest smile flicker across her face. She understood. She always did. That evening, after they left for a dinner meeting, I went into my study and opened the wooden box where I kept my most important papers. My will. My business documents. My bank information. Everything was in perfect order, exactly where it should be. But I knew they might not stay that way for long. I picked up the phone and dialed an old, familiar number. It rang twice before I heard a familiar voice. "Harold Jenkins speaking." "Harold," I said, my voice low. "It's George." There was a pause. "George. Good heavens, it's been months. How are you holding up?" I glanced at the door, half expecting to hear footsteps. "I've been better, my friend. I need your help." Quietly. "Ah," Harold said, his tone shifting instantly to business. "Quietly, you say. Tell me everything." And I did, everything Emma had told me, everything I had observed. When I finished, there was silence on the other end. "George," he said finally, "don't sign anything until I get there. I'll come by tomorrow morning. We'll handle this properly." I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. "Thank you, Harold." When I hung up, I leaned back in my chair and closed my eyes. My heart was heavy, not from fear of losing my wealth, but from something deeper. From the realization that love and trust could turn brittle, that family could fracture in ways money could never fix. Still, there was one thing they had forgotten. I didn't build my life on luck. I built it on foresight. And if they wanted to play a game, I was ready to play. That night, as the clock ticked softly toward midnight once more, I sat by the fire again, waiting for the storm to return. Somewhere upstairs, Emma was asleep, dreaming her innocent dreams. I prayed that she would never have to carry the kind of weight her parents had chosen to bear. I looked at the flames and whispered to myself, "Tomorrow they'll make their move. But I'll be ready." Outside, thunder rumbled in the distance, a warning or perhaps a promise. Either way, I wasn't afraid. Not anymore. That night, I couldn't sleep. My granddaughter Lily's trembling whisper kept echoing in my head, "Grandpa, tonight my parents are going to take away your fortune." The words had shaken something deep inside me. My own son, my own blood. I had raised him, given him everything I could. And now, the child I once held in my arms was plotting to take away everything I'd built over a lifetime. I sat by the window, the dim moonlight falling across my wrinkled hands. The house was quiet, almost too quiet. I could hear the faint ticking of the old clock on the wall and the distant hoot of an owl. But my heart was racing. Every sound seemed amplified, every shadow suspicious. I turned my gaze toward Lily's room. The poor girl must have been terrified to even say those words to me. I couldn't let her get caught in whatever was about to unfold. I stood up, my knees creaking with the weight of my age, and slowly walked to my old study, the one room in this house that still felt like mine. On the wall hung a picture of my late wife, Margaret. She'd passed away 5 years ago, and since then the house had never felt the same. I looked at her picture and whispered, "Margaret, our son has lost his way." Her eyes in the picture seemed to look back at me with sorrow. I knew I had to think fast. In the bottom drawer of my desk was an old steel box. Inside were my most important papers, my will, the deed to the house, and a few other legal documents. I unlocked it and started flipping through. My son, David, was still listed as the primary heir, along with his wife, Susan. At the time, it had seemed right. But over the past few years, I'd watched greed creep into David's eyes. Every conversation about money became an argument. He was always in debt, always chasing the next big investment. And Susan, she was worse. Cold, manipulative, always whispering in his ear. I took a deep breath. If they truly planned to take away my fortune tonight, I needed to protect it, and Lily. I decided I would call my lawyer in the morning to make some urgent changes. But the problem was surviving the night. Around 11:30 p.m., I heard footsteps outside my door. They were soft, cautious. I froze, holding my breath. The doorknob turned slightly, but didn't open. Then, silence. A chill ran down my spine. They were awake. Maybe they were waiting for me to fall asleep. I glanced around the room. My old walking stick leaned against the wall, sturdy oak, heavy enough to defend myself if needed. I picked it up and placed it beside my chair. Then I heard faint voices coming from the hallway, David and Susan. I carefully cracked open the study door just enough to listen. "She's asleep?" David asked in a low voice. "Yes," Susan whispered. I checked the guest room. "Lily's asleep too. It's the perfect time." My chest tightened. "Good," David said. "Once we get the documents from his study, we'll make it look like he misplaced them. Tomorrow, we'll take him to the bank and have him sign the transfer. He won't even know what hit him." My pulse pounded in my ears. "Are you sure about this, David?" Susan asked, though her tone wasn't concern. It was calculation. "He's old," David replied coldly. "Half the time he forgets where he puts his glasses. By next week, the money will be in our account. We'll tell him it's for safekeeping." Susan chuckled softly. "And if he finds out?" David's reply froze my blood. "Then he'll forget again soon enough." There was something in his voice, something dark and cruel that I didn't recognize. I quietly closed the door, my hands trembling. My own son was planning to rob me blind and possibly hurt me if I resisted. I sat down in the chair and rubbed my temples. What could I do? Call the police? They'd think I was paranoid, an old man losing his grip on reality. Then I remembered Lily. She was the only one who still cared. The only one who had warned me. I tiptoed down the hallway and gently opened her bedroom door. "Lily," I whispered. She stirred and blinked up at me, her small face pale in the moonlight. "Grandpa." "Sure," I said softly. "We need to be quiet. I heard your parents talking. You were right. They plan to take something from me tonight." Her eyes widened. "What are we going to do?" I forced a smile. "We're going to outsmart them." Years ago, when this house was built, I had a small secret chamber made beneath the floorboards of my study, a leftover from my days as an antique dealer. It was a secure place to hide valuables, just in case. Few people knew about it, not even David. I took Lily by the hand and led her back to my study. I pulled the rug aside and lifted a loose floorboard, revealing a small metal hatch. Inside was a safe. I quickly placed the steel box of documents inside, along with the spare keys, my checkbook, and the small pouch of gold coins Margaret and I had collected from our travels. Then I closed the hatch and covered it again with the rug. "Whatever happens tonight," I whispered to Lily, "promise me you won't tell anyone about this spot." She nodded silently, her eyes glistening with fear. I could see the tears threatening to spill. "Are they going to hurt you, Grandpa?" she asked softly. "Not if I can help it," I said, brushing her hair gently. "Now, go back to bed and pretend you know nothing." She hesitated, then hugged me tightly. I felt her small heart beating fast against my chest. When she left, I locked the study door and sat back down. I knew confrontation was inevitable. Minutes turned into hours. Around 2 a.m., the house creaked, that familiar sound of old wood settling. But this time it felt different. Intentional. Then the sound of footsteps again. 2 sets. They stopped right outside my study door. David whispered, "He's asleep. Let's do it." The doorknob rattled, then a soft click. They had a spare key. I kept my eyes half closed, pretending to be asleep in the chair. The door opened slowly. Through the narrow slit between my lashes, I saw David's tall frame enter first, followed by Susan holding a small flashlight. "There," she whispered, pointing to my desk. "That's where he keeps the box." David moved toward it. My pulse raced. The moment he opened that drawer, he'd realized the box was gone. He pulled it open. Empty. "What the hell?" he hissed. "Maybe he moved it," Susan whispered. "Check the cabinet." They rummaged around, their movements frantic. That's when I spoke, my voice low but firm. "Looking for something?" They froze. David turned slowly, his face pale in the dim light. "Dad, you scared me. We thought you were asleep." "Clearly," I said, standing up and leaning on my cane. "Why don't you tell me what you were looking for at this hour?" Susan quickly forced a smile. "Oh, we just heard a noise. Thought maybe you dropped something." I stared at her coldly. "You mean like my fortune?" David's eyes widened. "What are you talking about?" I took a step closer. "You disappoint me, David. I overheard everything." The room fell silent. For a moment I saw guilt flicker across his face. Then it hardened. "So what if you did?" he said quietly. "You're old, Dad. You don't need all that money. I've got a family to take care of." "By stealing from me?" I said, my voice rising. "Is that what your mother taught you?" His jaw tightened. "You wouldn't understand." I saw Susan's hand subtly reach behind her back, toward something. I tightened my grip on my cane. "What are you hiding there?" I demanded. Before I could react, Susan lunged forward, something shiny glinting in her hand. A knife. The flash of the knife caught the light like lightning, brief, terrifying, and silent. I stumbled back instinctively, my old reflexes fighting to keep up with my pounding heart. Susan's eyes were wide, desperate, and filled with something I could only describe as greed mixed with madness. "Put that down, Susan," I said quietly, raising my cane in defense. "You don't want to do this." "Just give us the box, Dad," David hissed from behind her, his voice trembling between fear and anger. "You don't understand what we're dealing with." "Oh, I understand perfectly," I said, forcing my voice to stay calm. "You've spent years chasing easy money, and now you think stealing from your own father will fix everything." David's nostrils flared. "You don't know what it's like. The debt, the people after me. Then you should have come to me like a son," I snapped. "Not like a thief." The room was thick with tension. The old clock on the wall ticked louder with every second, a cruel reminder that time was slipping away, and any wrong move could end it all. Susan took a slow step closer, knife trembling in her hand. "We didn't want it to come to this," she muttered. "But you forced us. If you'd just given David what he deserves." "What he deserves?" I barked. "You mean what you want." Her expression hardened. "You've always loved that little brat Lily more than your own son." At the mention of Lily's name, something inside me ignited. "Don't you dare talk about her," I warned, my voice low and dangerous. "She's the only one in this house with a heart still intact." David stepped between us, his hands shaking. "Dad, please, just tell me where the box is. No one has to get hurt." "No one but me, you mean," I said bitterly. I tightened my grip on the cane, ready for whatever came next. Susan lunged again, this time aiming straight for my chest. I swung my cane instinctively, knocking her hand aside. The knife clattered across the floor, sliding under the desk. David shouted, "Susan!" and ran toward her, but I stood between them. "Enough!" I yelled, my voice booming through the house. "You've gone too far." Susan's face twisted in rage. "You old fool! You think you can stop us? You can't even climb the stairs without that stick." Last night I'd seen both sides of humanity in my own family, the rot of greed and the fragile bloom of redemption. David's breakdown still haunted me, that moment when he realized what he'd become. His tears weren't for the money. They were for the man he'd lost along the way. But forgiveness takes time. David had left early, taking Lily to school. He promised to return later to talk, though I wasn't sure what there was left to say. I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee that had long gone cold. My mind wandered, replaying the sound of Susan's voice, the flash of the knife, the thud of the box hitting the floor. It felt surreal, like a nightmare that had somehow followed me into daylight. At around 10 a.m., I received a call from my lawyer confirming that the changes to my will were being processed. Lily would be the sole beneficiary of everything I owned. David would receive only a modest inheritance, enough to survive, not to squander. "Do you want me to notify your son?" the lawyer asked. "No," I said after a pause. "He doesn't need to know." "Not yet." "Understood, Mr. Graham." I hung up and stared out the window. The garden outside was overgrown, the roses drooping, the grass untrimmed. Margaret used to tend to them every morning. She'd hum softly while pruning the stems. I could still hear her song if I closed my eyes. For the first time in years, I felt truly alone. Around noon, there was a knock at the door, sharp, hurried. I hesitated before opening it. Standing there was a police officer, young and polite, his uniform crisp. "Mr. Harold Graham?" "Yes," I said cautiously. "I'm Officer Daniels." We received a report early this morning about a disturbance at this address last night. Your neighbor, Mrs. Keene, said she heard shouting. Of course. Mrs. Keene never missed a thing. I nodded slowly. There was a family disagreement. But everything's fine now. He studied me carefully. Do you want to file a report? Any threats, injuries, or property damage? I thought about it for a moment. I could easily have told him everything. The knife, the theft attempt, the betrayal. But then I pictured Lily's face. She didn't need her father in handcuffs. No, officer, I said finally. It was just a misunderstanding. He hesitated. All right, sir. But if anything else happens, don't hesitate to call. I thanked him and closed the door. My reflection in the glass looked old and tired. I felt like I'd aged 10 years overnight. By late afternoon, David returned. His clothes were wrinkled, and there were dark circles under his eyes. Dad, he began, stepping hesitantly inside, we need to talk. I motioned for him to sit, though part of me didn't trust him near my study again. He sat at the table, fidgeting with his hands. I went to see Susan. My stomach turned. Why? He sighed. Because I needed to tell her it's over. For good this time. She's not coming back. I searched his face. He looked broken, not angry, not defensive, just lost. She didn't take that well, he continued. She said she'll make us pay. That she'll tell people I'm abusive, that you're senile. She wants to ruin everything. I leaned back in my chair, the wood creaking under me. Let her talk. Truth has a way of finding daylight. He rubbed his temples. You don't understand, Dad. She knows things. My debts, my investors, the people I borrowed from. She could destroy me. You already destroyed yourself, I said quietly. He looked up sharply, his eyes glistening. I know, and I hate myself for it. For a long time, neither of us spoke. The silence between us was thick, filled with the ghosts of everything unsaid over the years. Finally, he whispered, I don't deserve forgiveness. No, I said softly. You don't. But that's what makes it worth giving. He looked at me with disbelief. You'd still forgive me? After last night. I'm not forgiving what you did, I said. I'm forgiving the part of you that knows it was wrong. The part your mother believed still existed. He lowered his head, tears spilling silently onto the table. That night, the house felt calmer. David had gone to stay at a friend's house, and Lily was sleeping peacefully in her room. I finally allowed myself to relax, at least a little. But around midnight, I woke to the sound of something shattering. My heart jolted. I grabbed my cane and slowly made my way downstairs. The living room light was still off, but faint moonlight glowed through the curtains. There, by the window, a shadow moved. Who's there? I called out, my voice trembling slightly. Silence. Then a whisper. You should have stayed quiet, old man. The voice was unmistakable. Susan. She stepped out of the shadows, her hair wild, her face pale. You think you can just cut me out of the picture? Rewrite your will and keep your little secrets hidden. My pulse raced. Susan, please, you need to leave. She laughed, a cold, bitter laugh that made my blood run cold. Oh, I'm not leaving empty-handed this time. I tightened my grip on the cane. Lily's asleep upstairs. Don't wake her. Relax, she said mockingly. I'm not here for the kid. Then she pulled something from her coat, not a knife this time, but a small metal canister. Gasoline. My chest tightened in horror. Susan, what are you doing? If I can't have your fortune, I'll make sure no one does, she hissed. Before I could stop her, she splashed the liquid across the curtains, the rug, the wooden floorboards. The acrid smell filled the air. Stop! I shouted. You'll burn the whole house down. That's the point, she said coldly. I lunged forward and grabbed her wrist just as she pulled out a lighter. We struggled, the cane clattering to the floor. She was stronger than I expected, fueled by rage and desperation. The lighter flicked, a small flame dancing dangerously close to the soaked rug. Let go, she screamed. No, I growled, gripping her tighter. You've done enough damage. She shoved me backward, and I hit the floor hard. My vision blurred. I could barely breathe. Through the haze, I saw her standing over me, flame still flickering in her hand. Then, Mom. The voice was small, trembling. Lily stood at the top of the stairs, her eyes wide with fear. Susan froze. Go back upstairs, Lily. I shouted. Now. But Lily didn't move. She just stared at Susan, her mother, as tears rolled down her face. Why are you hurting Grandpa? Susan's hand trembled. For a moment, her anger faltered. The lighter slipped from her grasp and clattered to the floor. The tiny flame sputtered out. She fell to her knees, sobbing. I didn't mean to. I dragged myself up slowly, every joint in my body aching. I walked over and kicked the canister away. Maybe, I said softly, you didn't mean to. But intent doesn't erase consequence. Maybe, I said quietly, but I still know how to defend myself. Before either of them could move, I kicked the rug away from the floorboards, right above the hidden safe. I wanted to distract them, buy myself a moment. David's eyes darted down. So that's where it is, he said, his tone suddenly cold. Stay away from that floor, I warned. But greed had already blinded him. He pushed past me, dropping to his knees, feeling for the loose board. I swung my cane and hit his shoulder, but he grunted and shoved me back. Susan scrambled toward the desk to retrieve the knife. Everything was chaos. I fell against the wall, the pain shooting up my back. My vision blurred for a moment. I heard the floorboard creak, then David's voice. Got it. The hatch opened with a metallic click. He pulled out the steel box, his hands trembling with triumph. David! I shouted. Stop. That box doesn't just hold money. It holds your mother's memory. Her will. Her letters to you. He froze, looking down at it. For a fleeting second, I saw conflict in his eyes. But then Susan spoke, and the spell broke. Don't listen to him, she hissed. He's lying. Open it. David opened the latch. Inside, the documents lay neatly stacked, along with the velvet pouch of gold coins. Susan's eyes gleamed. Take the coins and the papers. We can burn the rest. My heart broke. I forced myself to stand, every bone in my body screaming in protest. You'll regret this, both of you, I said hoarsely. You're destroying what's left of this family. Susan sneered. There's nothing left to destroy. Then, from behind us, a voice cried out, trembling but strong. Stop. It was Lily. She stood in the doorway, clutching her stuffed rabbit, her little face pale. David's expression shifted immediately. Shame flickered across it. Lily, sweetheart, go back to bed. No, she said, tears streaming down her cheeks. You're hurting Grandpa. Susan sighed impatiently. Great. Now we have a witness. David turned on her. She's our daughter, Susan. Then teach her to stay quiet. Susan snapped. That was it. Something inside David cracked. He slammed the box shut and glared at his wife. You've done enough. Susan looked stunned. What are you saying? I said enough. David roared. Look at what you've turned me into. I was about to rob my own father. I could barely breathe. Was he waking up from his madness? Susan scowled. Don't play the saint now, David. You wanted this as much as I did. I wanted a solution, he shot back. Not this, not knives and midnight thefts. Lily ran to me, wrapping her arms around my waist. Grandpa, please don't let them take your things. I stroked her hair gently. It's all right, my dear. It's going to be all right. Susan's expression turned icy. No, it's not. Before anyone could react, she lunged for the box again, but this time David blocked her. They struggled for control. The box clutched between them. Papers flew into the air like confetti. My wife's letters, my will, my memories scattering across the floor. Let go! Susan screamed. You're insane! David shouted back. Both of you stop! I cried. Then, crack! The sound echoed like a gunshot. The box hit the ground, splitting open. The pouch of coins rolled across the floor, scattering gold like fallen stars. Susan froze, staring at them, mesmerized. She bent down to grab them, but David pushed her away. Get out, he said quietly. She blinked. What? I said get out of this house, he growled, before I lose whatever's left of my sanity. Susan stared at him in disbelief. Then her lips twisted into a bitter smile. Fine. You'll regret this, David. She stormed out, slamming the door so hard that the window rattled. Silence fell. David stood there, breathing heavily, staring down at the scattered papers. I never meant for it to go this far, he said finally, his voice breaking. I just wanted to fix things. The debts, the calls, the threats. I looked at him quietly. And you thought stealing from your father would fix them? He nodded slowly. I wasn't thinking straight. Lily tugged at his sleeve. Daddy, why did you want to hurt Grandpa? David's face crumpled. He fell to his knees and hugged her tightly. I didn't mean to, sweetheart. I swear. I turned away, my eyes wet. I wanted to forgive him, but the betrayal cut deep. Go, I said softly. Take Lily to her room. I need to think. He looked up at me, eyes red. Dad. Please, I interrupted. He nodded slowly, took Lily's hand, and walked out. When they were gone, I sank into my chair, the weight of it all pressing down on me. The knife still lay under the desk. The gold coins shimmered faintly in the moonlight. I reached down and picked up one of Margaret's letters. The paper crinkled, her handwriting faded but familiar. My dearest Harold, it began, if you're reading this, then you're alone again. Remember, family isn't about blood. It's about love. Protect the ones who still have goodness left in them. Tears streamed down my cheeks. I knew what I had to do. At dawn, I called my lawyer. Change the will, I said. Everything, the house, the savings, the assets. It all goes into a trust for Lily. No one else touches it. Understood, he said quietly. And your son? I hesitated. Leave him something small, enough to remind him that I still believe he can change. When I hung up, the sun was rising, painting the horizon gold. David came downstairs, his eyes hollow. Susan's gone, he said. I know, I replied. He looked at me for a long moment. Can you ever forgive me, Dad? I met his gaze. I can't forget what you did, David. But I can hope that one day you'll forgive yourself. He nodded, tears glistening in his eyes. As he turned to go, Lily ran back into the room and hugged me tightly. You're the best grandpa ever, she whispered. I smiled, my heart aching and full all at once. Maybe, just maybe, Margaret was right. Love was still here, hidden beneath the ruins of greed and regret. The sun rose slowly that morning, bleeding soft gold through the curtains. It should have been peaceful, but the silence in my house felt heavy, like the air just before a storm. After the chaos of last night, everything looked the same yet somehow different. The scattered papers still lay across the study floor. My wife's letters, legal documents, and those few gold coins glimmering faintly in the morning light. But the house no longer felt like my home. It felt wounded. I picked up the letters one by one, smoothing the crumpled edges with trembling hands. Margaret's voice echoed in my mind as I read her words again and again. Protect the ones who still have goodness left in them. Susan covered her face with her hands, shaking uncontrollably. The sirens came 15 minutes later. I don't know who called them. Maybe Lily, maybe the neighbors again. Susan was taken away quietly, her wrists cuffed, her eyes hollow. David arrived just as they were leading her out. He didn't say a word. He just watched, pale and trembling. When the police were gone, he turned to me. She's really gone this time. I nodded. Let's hope this is the start of something better. He looked up the stairs where Lily stood watching silently. She saw it all, didn't she? Yes, I said quietly. But she saw the truth too. He swallowed hard. Then maybe there's still a chance to make things right. I nodded slowly. There always is, son, if you start before it's too late. That night, as I tucked Lily into bed, she looked up at me and whispered, "Grandpa, are we safe now?" I smiled faintly, brushing her hair. "Yes, sweetheart, we're safe." But deep inside, I knew safety was fragile, like glass. Once cracked, it never fully returns to its original form. And yet, in that moment, as the house settled into uneasy silence, I felt something I hadn't in years. Hope. Morning arrived, but peace did not. The faint sunlight that crept through my window felt colder than usual, as though the warmth of life itself had withdrawn from this house. The storm from last night had passed, but the echoes of confrontation still hung in the air, sharp, cutting, and unforgettable. I hadn't slept. I spent the entire night sitting in my study, the letter from my late wife still open on the desk. Her handwriting, elegant and soft, seemed to glow faintly in the dim light of dawn. I kept rereading the lines she had written years ago. If ever the day comes when our family forgets love for the sake of wealth, remember, true riches lie in forgiveness. Forgiveness. Such a fragile word. But how could I forgive when my own children had plotted to rob me of my life's work? I heard the creak of the staircase. Someone was awake. I instinctively looked up, half expecting another confrontation, but it was Lily, my granddaughter, her small figure appearing in the doorway, her eyes still red from crying. "Grandpa," she whispered, her voice trembling, "are you okay?" I smiled weakly, though my heart felt like a cracked mirror. "I'm all right, sweetheart. Come here." She ran to me, wrapping her little arms around my shoulders. For a moment I felt a spark of warmth, the kind I hadn't felt in a long time. "I heard Mom and Dad fighting again last night," she said softly. "They were blaming each other. I think they're scared." "Good," I murmured under my breath, then regretted it immediately. She didn't deserve to hear bitterness. "Lily," I said gently, "sometimes people make mistakes when they're afraid. But what matters is whether they choose to fix them." She looked up at me, her big brown eyes filled with hope. "Will they fix it?" I sighed. "I don't know. But I will give them the chance." By noon, the house was silent again. I asked my lawyer, Mr. Carter, to come by. He was an old friend, someone who had stood by me through the early years when I built my business from nothing. He arrived promptly, briefcase in hand, expression grave. "I read your message. It sounds like a family crisis." "That's one way to put it," I replied dryly. We sat down in the study. I poured 2 cups of coffee, though mine remained untouched. "Carter," I said, "I need to make changes to my will." His eyes widened slightly. "Are you sure? You just updated it last year." "I'm sure," I said firmly, "but not out of spite. This isn't about punishment. It's about teaching a lesson." He nodded slowly, understanding that tone. We'd been through many storms together. "I want to create something called the Reckoning Clause," I explained. "My children, Michael and Sarah, they'll still receive their shares. But under one condition." "What condition?" Carter asked. "They must each spend 1 year working for the charity foundation your firm helped me establish, the Hope Trust. During that year, they'll receive no income from me, no access to the estate, and no privileges. Only after they prove they can live with humility and compassion will they inherit anything." Carter's expression softened. "You always were a man of principle, Arthur. That's a wise decision." "Wise?" I sighed. "No. It's necessary." We finalized the paperwork over the next hour. I signed every page with steady hands. By the end of it, I felt something lift from my chest. Not joy, but a strange peace that comes only after making a painful but righteous choice. That evening, I called for a family meeting. Michael and Sarah arrived with uneasy expressions. Neither looked me in the eye. Lily sat quietly beside me, clutching her doll, the room heavy with tension. "Thank you for coming," I began, my voice calm but firm. "There are things we need to discuss, and I want no lies tonight." Michael was the first to break the silence. "Dad, we were wrong. We got scared. The company's struggling, the expenses are high, and we—" "You plotted to take what wasn't yours," I interrupted sharply. "Let's not twist the truth." Sarah started crying. "We weren't going to hurt you, Dad. We just thought—" "That I was too old to manage my affairs?" I finished for her. "That I'd hand over my fortune before death even came knocking?" They both fell silent. I looked at Lily. She stared at her parents, her face pale, confused. "Is that true?" she whispered. Neither could answer. I leaned back in my chair. "I'm not angry anymore," I said quietly. "But I am disappointed. I built everything in this family with 2 hands, 1 dream, and your mother by my side. You both were raised with love, education, and privilege. And yet, you let greed cloud your hearts." Sarah's tears fell harder. Michael just looked down, ashamed. "That's why," I continued, "I've changed my will. You'll both still receive your inheritance, but only if you earn it through compassion. You'll work 1 year for the Hope Trust. Help the people who have nothing. Only then will you understand the value of what you almost stole." Michael's eyes widened. "You can't be serious." "Oh, I am," I said sharply. "The papers are signed." The room went still. Even the clock on the wall seemed to pause. Lily broke the silence. "Grandpa, will Mom and Dad still love me if they have to do that?" I reached out, pulling her onto my lap. "Sweetheart, love isn't lost because of punishment. Sometimes love needs to be rebuilt, like a house after a storm. Stronger, better, and more honest." Sarah sobbed quietly. Michael rubbed his temples, overwhelmed. For once, they looked less like greedy adults and more like scared children who had finally seen the consequences of their choices. "Dad," Michael finally said, his voice cracking, "I'll do it. I'll work for the trust. I want to fix this." Sarah nodded through her tears. "Me too." I closed my eyes, letting relief wash over me. Then maybe there's still hope for this family after all. That night, after they had all gone to bed, I stood by the window of my study again. The garden outside was silent, the moonlight spilling over the old oak tree where Lily loved to play. I thought of my late wife again, her laughter, her wisdom, her endless patience. "You were right, my love," I whispered into the still air. Sometimes wealth blinds us, but love always finds a way back. The wind rustled softly, as if in reply. I smiled faintly. Tomorrow begins the reckoning, not just for them, but for all of us. And for the first time in many nights, I felt something close to peace. When I woke up the next morning, the house felt lighter. The tension that had poisoned its walls seemed to have faded, replaced by a quiet sense of purpose. Maybe it was just hope clinging to my old bones, but for the first time in weeks, I felt that my children had truly heard me. Michael and Sarah left that afternoon to begin their first day at the Hope Trust. Watching them drive away was strange. They were no longer the entitled heirs who once plotted behind closed doors. They were simply 2 lost souls, standing at the crossroads between greed and grace. Lily stood beside me at the window, holding my hand. "Will they be okay, Grandpa?" she asked softly. I smiled faintly. "They will be, my dear. But it will not be easy. Redemption never is." The Hope Trust was not a glamorous place. It was a sprawling compound on the edge of town, part orphanage, part hospital, part community center. The walls were old but well kept, the air filled with the scent of soap and fresh bread. Michael was assigned to the maintenance team, fixing broken lights, mending walls, and cleaning the floors. Sarah, with her background in business, was tasked with handling donations and food distribution. At first, both struggled. I heard from Mr. Carter, who supervised their progress, that Michael complained endlessly about the physical labor. "I'm not built for this," he'd grumble, wiping sweat from his brow. Sarah, on the other hand, found herself overwhelmed by the stories of the people she met, widows, orphans, single mothers, all struggling to survive. She had always been the softer one, more emotional, but life in luxury had made her forget the reality of pain. One afternoon, a letter arrived for me, written in Sarah's delicate handwriting. Dear Dad, it's been 3 weeks at the trust, and I can barely recognize myself. Yesterday, I met a woman named Clara. She lost her husband to illness and has 2 children. She told me she wakes up every morning and thanks God just for a single meal. I've been helping her with paperwork for aid, and when she smiled at me, it felt like something inside me healed, something I didn't even know was broken. I think I understand now what you meant when you said true wealth lies in compassion. I'm sorry, Dad. Truly sorry. Love, Sarah. I read that letter 3 times before folding it gently and placing it in my desk drawer. Tears burned in my eyes, not from sadness, but from something far deeper. For years, I thought my children had lost their way completely. But now, I realized redemption was not a dream. It was happening. Slowly, but surely. Michael, however, took longer to change. His pride was a thick wall, built from years of success and entitlement. But fate has a way of cracking even the strongest walls. One evening, he was helping repair the roof of the children's dormitory when a storm rolled in. Lightning split the sky, and rain poured down like punishment. As he climbed down the ladder, he slipped, twisting his ankle badly. The children rushed to help him, small, barefoot, poor, yet they treated him like family. One little boy, no older than 8, gave Michael his only dry towel. Here, mister. You helped fix our roof. You can have this. Michael later wrote to me, describing that moment. Dear Dad, I've been selfish all my life. That boy had nothing, yet he gave me his towel without hesitation. I've made millions and never felt what I felt at that moment. Gratitude. Maybe this is what Mom always meant when she said we're blessed to give, not just to receive. I'll never forget that boy's face. For the first time in years, I feel human. Your son, Michael. When I finished reading his letter, I closed my eyes and whispered a silent prayer. My wife's spirit, wherever she was, must have been smiling. Months passed. The seasons changed. Autumn's gold faded into the quiet of winter. Each week, I received updates from the trust. Michael had become the most hard-working member of the maintenance team. He even started teaching some of the orphans basic carpentry. Sarah launched a small program that helped single mothers find employment through local partnerships. Word of their transformation spread beyond the trust. Donors praised their work, and volunteers began arriving from other cities, inspired by their leadership. When I visited the trust for the first time in December, I almost didn't recognize my own children. Michael greeted me with a firm handshake, his clothes dusty, his face sunburnt, but his eyes, they were alive again. Sarah ran to hug me, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Dad," she whispered, "thank you. You saved us." I smiled and placed my hands on her shoulders. "No, my dear. You saved yourselves." As we walked through the hallways, children waved at us, some shouting Michael's name, others clinging to Sarah's dress. The trust was alive, not just with people, but with love. On Christmas Eve, we held a small celebration at the trust. The dining hall was decorated with handmade paper stars, and the children sang songs they'd learned from volunteers. Lily sat beside me, her eyes shining with pride as she watched her parents laugh and serve food. At one point, Sarah stood up to speak. Her voice trembled as she addressed the crowd. "This time last year," she began, "I was someone who thought money was the only thing that mattered. But now I know the truth. Wealth without kindness is poverty in disguise. And thanks to my father, I got a second chance to understand that." The room erupted in applause. I felt my throat tighten. When she sat down, Michael leaned over and whispered, "Dad, I've decided to stay here even after the year ends. I want to help rebuild this place. Maybe expand it." For a long moment, I couldn't speak. I simply nodded, fighting the emotion that welled up in my chest. A year later, when the will's conditions were finally fulfilled, I called my lawyer again. "Carter," I said, "they've done it. They've earned every penny, and more." He smiled. "I'll reinstate their inheritance immediately." But I wasn't finished. "There's one more change I want to make," I added. "What's that?" "I want to name the Hope Trust as a permanent beneficiary, equal to both of my children. Because now, this family's wealth must always serve a purpose." Carter nodded in approval. "You've built not just an empire, Arthur. You've built a legacy." That evening, when my children returned home, I gathered them by the fireplace. "You've both made me proud," I said softly. "Your mother's spirit lives on through what you've done. The wealth I leave behind now belongs to a better cause, not just to our name, but to every soul you've touched this year." Michael smiled, his eyes wet. "Thank you, Dad, for everything." Sarah reached for my hand. "And thank you for believing we could change." Lily climbed into my lap, hugging me tight. "Grandpa, are you happy now?" I kissed the top of her head. "More than you can ever imagine, sweetheart, because you, all of you, found your way back home." The fire crackled softly, filling the silence that followed with warmth and peace. For the first time in my long life, I felt complete. The house was quieter than it had ever been. Not the silence of loneliness, but the peaceful hush that comes after storms have passed, the calm when all debts have been paid and hearts have finally healed. It had been a year since Michael and Sarah completed their time at the Hope Trust. The charity had blossomed into something magnificent, a beacon of compassion in our small town. People spoke of it as if it were sacred ground, and in many ways it was. It was the place where my children found themselves again. Now I sat by the same fireplace where this story had begun. My favorite armchair, a soft blanket, and Lily playing quietly with her sketchbook on the rug. The golden afternoon light streamed through the windows, wrapping everything in a warm glow. But today wasn't just another quiet afternoon. Today I had something to reveal. Something I'd kept hidden all these years. "Lily," I said gently, "come sit beside me for a moment, sweetheart." She looked up, curious, and came over. "Yes, Grandpa." I smiled, though my heart was heavy. "You remember how I told you that sometimes love needs to be rebuilt?" She nodded. "Yes. You said it after Mom and Dad made up." "That's right," I said softly. "But there's something else I need to tell you. Something about how this all began, and why you were the one who saved us." Her eyes widened. "Me?" "Yes," I whispered, reaching for a small wooden box on the mantel. It was old, carved by hand, and polished with time. I opened it carefully and pulled out a folded letter, yellowed with age. "This," I said, handing it to her, "was written by your grandmother before she passed away. She asked me not to read it until the day I thought our family had truly lost its way. Lily's small fingers brushed over the fragile paper. "Did you read it?" I nodded slowly. "The night I discovered what your parents planned, I finally opened it. And what I found inside changed everything." I took a deep breath, remembering that night vividly. The weight of betrayal, the tears I shed, and the voice of my wife echoing from beyond the grave. "Your grandmother wrote," I began, "that one day our family's heart would be tested. She said I must not fight greed with anger, but with love, and that the reminder of love would come from the youngest in the family, the one still untouched by pride." Lily's mouth parted in surprise. "That's me." I smiled, my eyes misty. "Yes, my dear. You were her hope. You were the whisper that saved us." She blinked, remembering that fateful night. "You mean when I told you what Mom and Dad were going to do?" I nodded. "Yes. You see, if you hadn't whispered those words, everything might have fallen apart. Your honesty gave me the chance to make things right, to remind them, and myself, that love must always come before money." Lily looked down, tears gathering in her eyes. "I didn't do it to be brave. I just didn't want you to be sad." I cupped her cheek gently. "And that, sweetheart, is exactly what bravery is, choosing kindness even when you're afraid." Later that evening, the whole family gathered for dinner. It was a tradition we'd restarted after the events of the previous year. Every Sunday, no matter how busy life became, we ate together under one roof. The table was lively. Laughter, stories, the clinking of plates. Sarah looked radiant, her eyes no longer shadowed by guilt. Michael teased Lily about her drawing skills, and she stuck her tongue out at him playfully. I watched them all, heart swelling with quiet pride. For a moment, it felt like my wife was there too, smiling from her favorite chair across the table. Halfway through dinner, I cleared my throat. "Everyone," I began, "there's something I need to tell you." The chatter died instantly. All eyes turned to me. "I've made one final change to my will," I said calmly, "and this one will stay forever." Michael frowned. "Dad, you've done enough. You don't need to worry about that anymore." "Oh, but I do," I said with a soft chuckle. "Because this isn't about money. It's about legacy." I looked at Sarah, then Michael, and finally at Lily. "You see, everything we went through, the lies, the forgiveness, the redemption, it wasn't just a test of character. It was a lesson your mother and I always hoped this family would never forget." I took a deep breath before continuing. "From now on, our family trust, all its earnings and assets, will be divided equally into 3 parts. One for you, Michael, one for you, Sarah, and one for the Hope Trust. But there's one special clause. The managing trustee of the family legacy, the person who will oversee its purpose, will be Lily when she turns 21. The room went completely silent. Sarah blinked. "Lily." Michael leaned forward. "Dad, are you sure?" I smiled. "Never been more sure. You both learned the value of wealth through loss. Lily, on the other hand, carries the innocence and truth that saved this family. She'll grow up knowing what real love and honesty mean, and that's exactly the kind of person I want guiding our legacy." Lily's eyes widened. "Me? But I'm just a kid." I chuckled warmly. "That's what makes you perfect for it. One day, when you're older, you'll understand." Sarah stood up and came around the table, tears in her eyes. She hugged me tightly. "Thank you, Dad, for trusting us again." and for trusting her." Michael nodded solemnly. "You were right all along. Money means nothing without honor. We'll make sure Lily learns that every day." Lily, still in shock, looked up at me. "Grandpa, will you be there when I turn 21? Her question caught me off guard, and for a brief moment I couldn't speak. Then I smiled gently. "Maybe not in the way you think, sweetheart. But I'll always be here, in this house, in this family, and in your heart." She smiled, though a single tear rolled down her cheek. That night, after everyone had gone to bed, I sat once again in my study, the same place where all my doubts once lived. I looked around at the shelves filled with photographs, letters, and memories. On my desk sat a small wooden frame with a photograph of my wife holding baby Michael, her eyes full of hope. I picked it up, running my fingers along the edges. "We did it, my love," I whispered. "Our family is whole again." As the fire crackled, I pulled out one last letter, written not for lawyers or family, but for Lily. "My dearest Lily, if you're reading this, it means you've grown into the wonderful young woman I always knew you'd become. You were the spark that kept our family from falling apart, and that spark will light your way for the rest of your life. When you find yourself lost or afraid, remember this: money can buy comfort, but love builds strength. Power can command respect, but kindness wins hearts. The legacy I leave you isn't the fortune, it's the wisdom that you carry in your heart. Protect it well. Love always, Grandpa." As I finished writing, I sealed the letter in an envelope and placed it in the same wooden box with my wife's old letter. 2 generations of love, bound by time. Outside, the night was peaceful. The moonlight poured through the window, illuminating the family portrait above the mantel, all of us together, smiling. I leaned back in my chair, the weight of years finally lifting from my shoulders. My heart felt full. No regrets, no anger, only gratitude. And as I closed my eyes, I could almost hear my wife's voice whispering softly in the dark. "You kept the promise, Arthur. You brought them home." A gentle smile crossed my face. Because in the end, it wasn't the fortune that mattered, it was the legacy of love that would never fade. Sometimes, the greatest wealth a man can leave behind isn't gold, or property, or a will written in fine ink. It's the love he shared, the lessons he passed on, and the memories that live on in the hearts of those who truly cared. In the end, I didn't lose my fortune. I simply discovered where it truly belonged. Not in banks or safes, but in the eyes of my granddaughter, in the forgiveness I found for my son, and in the peace I finally felt within myself. If you've listened this far, perhaps you've seen a reflection of your own story somewhere in mine, a reminder that no matter what we own, we are only as rich as the love we give. Thank you for staying with me till the end. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more bedtime tales of mystery, emotion, and redemption. Good night. And remember, sometimes the quietest whispers hold the loudest truths.